Of warm, humid summers, when the sea finally encircled our islands, separating us from the continent. The life of our seas is the next chapter in the natural history of the living isles.
And Julian Pettifer goes on his underwater voyage of discovery and explores the depths of the seas which surround the British Isles next Sunday at the same time. And this BBC book, Safari UK, The Living Isles, which accompanies this series, is available now from bookshops. On BBC2 in a couple of minutes, more sheepdogs will be put through their paces in One Man and His Dog. Here on BBC1 in 15 minutes, Alan Titchmarsh continues his travels following the footsteps of pilgrims around Britain and Ireland, this weekend stopping off in Scotland. First on BBC1, the news with Moira Stewart.
The headlines this evening: the Yugoslav Republic of Croatia says it wants a ceasefire after a weekend of fierce attacks from federal troops and warplanes. Don't expect many more interest rate cuts, says the government. Nigel Mansell makes it 3 in a row. But despite a fight, England lose again to the West Indies. Good evening. After 2 days of heavy fighting in Yugoslavia, the Republic of Croatia says it wants a ceasefire supervised by observers from the European community. At least 30 people have been killed in the latest clashes in Croatia, involving local separatists and members of the Serbian minority who are opposed to Croatian independence. The worst of the fighting has been just south of Zagreb. The Federal Army and Air Force have again joined in attacks on Croatian positions.
That ceasefire was given the go-ahead by Croatia's Supreme State Council, meeting in the capital, Zagreb. In its statement, Croatia's highest state body came down on the side of the federal leadership's call for a ceasefire last Friday, because of what it called the escalation of the crisis and the heavy casualties on both sides. Apart from giving the hard-pressed Croatian forces a much-needed breathing space, Zagreb sees the ceasefire as an essential first step to getting the army back to barracks. Even before that, there's a barrier of trust to overcome, with each side accusing the other of shooting first. Yet another barrier on the road to peace is that the rebel Serbs have given no indication that they would observe a ceasefire. Indeed, some of their leaders have warned that they intend to push their forces even closer to the Croatian capital. Until the Serbs agree to withdraw, there will be little incentive for Croatia to stand down its National Guard, as called for by Belgrade. Meanwhile, after the bloodshed of Friday and Saturday, each side appears to be counting its losses, with only sporadic fighting reported during the day. Jim Fish, BBC News, Belgrade.
The Israeli government has failed to meet the American request to accept Middle East peace talks before this week's summit in Moscow before President Bush and President Gorbachev. After today's meeting of the Israeli cabinet, one minister said Israel was prepared to go to a peace conference, but some questions still had to be answered.
Prime Minister Shamir, pictured at this morning's Jerusalem cabinet meeting, knows that the Americans and the Soviets want a yes answer to coincide with the summit, and the Israelis say they're on track to give it, provided they see the list of membership of a Palestinian delegation first. They still won't yield on the issue of Arabs from East Jerusalem, who they say cannot take part. And as always, they have no intention of bargaining any territory away in exchange for peace.
Israel has, in principle, said yes, but this yes is conditioned by the Palestinians not being from East Jerusalem and not being PLO, that's all.
East Jerusalem Palestinians, led by Faisal Husseini, are ridiculing any prospect of talks without them. What the Americans are trying to do is get the conference off the ground first, with a joint Jordanian-Palestinian presence, and address the problem of Jerusalem later. Michael Macmillan, BBC News in Jerusalem.
Treasury ministers say it's unlikely there'll be any further cuts in interest and mortgage rates this year. But there are real signs that the recession is slowing down.
Treasury ministers have warned that interest rates may not have much further to fall, now that the big drop in economic output over the last year is flattening out. Possible higher interest rates in Germany from next month are also expected to limit the Treasury's room for manoeuvre.
As to the possibility of further interest rate reductions, I think we have made clear that this depends almost entirely on our position in the exchange rate mechanism, though to some extent the performance of inflation too. That's clearly on a downward trend, but we are now only 2% higher than German interest rates, and I think the room for further reductions is clearly far more constrained than it was when our rates were 15% and theirs were 8%.
The Treasury's thrice-yearly bulletin, published today, concludes that the pace of recession is moderating both in manufacturing and in the economy at large. The latest evidence, it claims, is consistent with the Chancellor's forecast in his budget in March, that output would begin to rise slowly in the second half of this year. Ministers like to use the word recovery, after recession, to apply to any rise at all in output, which could happen before Christmas, even if no further cuts in interest rates are possible. But it's still likely to be a year or two before the gap between the actual output and the full potential of the economy begins to close, and consumers and businesses begin to feel that economic conditions are getting better. And unemployment is likely to go on rising for a year after that.
The Chancellor, Norman Lamont, has said the country is making dramatic progress. He again predicted economic recovery in the second half of the year. Labour said the Chancellor was being extraordinarily complacent.
The Chancellor was in an upbeat mood, forecasting that inflation would continue to fall and pointing out that there had already been substantial cuts in interest rates.
I think we are making dramatic progress. To have got inflation down below 4%, which it will be, I believe, at the end of this year, which will be very comparable to the best in Europe, that will be a tremendous achievement and will give us a very good basis for recovery.
But Labour was not impressed by the Chancellor's optimism.
The Chancellor's comments seem to me to be both unconvincing and also, frankly, complacent. He seems to have no idea what the reality is about our economy, the businesses that are going into liquidation, the people who are becoming unemployed. He really ought to show more concern and more of a change in government policy.
For the Liberal Democrats, Alan Beath said that Mr Lamont is trying to navigate without a compass and without much idea of where he's going. The Chancellor accepts that it could take up to a year for the full effects of the interest rate cuts to be felt by the voters. That's one of the reasons why an autumn election is unlikely. But the main parties are taking no chances. Over the next few days, they'll be holding a series of news conferences as they intensify their summer offensives.
And the Chancellor says he hopes the inquiry into the collapse of the BCCI will be completed before the next general election. Mr Lamont denied there was any attempt at a cover-up. A delegation of BCCI depositors and staff has gone to Downing Street and presented a petition asking for parts of the bank to be saved. Leading the group was the Labour MP Keith Vaz, who said the Prime Minister should stop the bank from being wound up on Tuesday. Government officials said it was a matter for the liquidators, not Mr Major. A loyalist terrorist group, the Ulster Freedom Fighters, says it planted incendiary bombs in the Irish Republic last night. It claims 50 devices were left in 8 towns. 2 went off in a Dublin department store starting small fires. No one was hurt. Other bombs went off in pubs at Dunleer and Dundalk.
3 incendiary devices went off in a department store in Dublin city centre late last night. Cleaning staff in the shop at the time weren't injured, and there was minor damage. Several other devices ignited at 2 pubs further north near Dundalk and Dunleer on the main road between Belfast and Dublin. They caused slight damage to furniture. The police say the devices are similar to those left in shops in Dublin a few months ago. The size of a tape cassette, they're easily hidden. The Ulster Freedom Fighters, a name of convenience used by the legal paramilitary group the Ulster Defence Association, say 50 devices have been left at locations in 8 towns in the Republic.
We are asking people who own stores, management, to come in and check, because it is very difficult to find those items. They're well hidden, they can be easily hidden in clothing, and they're quite small, and we really don't know. Perhaps there are others there that have not ignited.
2 months ago, the UFF murdered a Sinn Féin councillor in County Donegal. They warned there would be more violence as long as the Irish government continued to claim jurisdiction over Northern Ireland. These latest attacks are an illustration of an increase in such loyalist violence.
United Nations inspectors in Baghdad say that Iraq has given them more information about its nuclear program. This afternoon, the team visited Tuwaitha near Baghdad, where Iraq set up a secret plant to produce enriched uranium. Iraq's president, Saddam Hussein, has spoken to Shia Muslims in the southern holy city of Najaf. He accused the West of trying to starve the people of Iraq by continuing to operate economic sanctions.
Saddam Hussein has ordered that the shrine of Abbas, son of the founder of the Shia faith, be restored, an act of conciliation towards the southern Shia of Karbala, whose rebellion his troops so brutally crushed. As well as rebuilding, though, there's been demolition of the areas around and between the shrines of Abbas and of his brother Hussein. The official reason is to provide courtyards and gardens. The Shias think there's a sinister motive, to clear a field of fire, to prevent them using the shrines as places of sanctuary in case of another uprising. The countryside too has seen destruction. At the time of the fighting, roadside groves of date palms were systematically destroyed to deny the rebels cover. There are no official figures for the numbers killed in the fighting. Army officers have spoken of casualties in the tens, maybe the hundreds. But there are persistent rumours that the fighting here lasted just around a week and that between 2,000 and 4,000 Republican Guards were killed. It's difficult to imagine the rebel casualties if that was the case. Yesterday, Saddam Hussein came here to the Shia's most sacred city, Najaf, site of the shrine of the Imam Ali, the founder of their faith. The president's picture's here already. He's at prayer, his gun with him. He told the families of some of those killed in the uprising that the Iranians were behind it, and warned Iraqi Shiites have nothing to do with them. Of the West, he said its leaders thought of Iraqis as dogs, not people. Bob Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
England's cricketers have lost the 4th test at Edgbaston, but not without a fight. Defiant hitting by the tail enders enabled them to set a target of 152, and the West Indies quickly lost 3 top batsmen before winning by 7 wickets.
Walking out to face defeat, but England's 9th wicket pair were heading instead for a place in the record books. If a West Indies victory was supposed to be a mere formality, no one had told Chris Lewis. England's bowling hero from yesterday was becoming the batting hero today. As West Indian concern increased, so did Lewis's confidence. He made his maiden test half-century, the only England batsman to pass 50 in the match. Derek Pringle was content to provide sound support with only the occasional flourish in a stand of 92, a 9th wicket record against the West Indies. The partnership, which had breathed new life into the game, ended when Lewis was caught in the covers by Lambert for 65. His innings had helped to give England an outside chance of victory, and the odds on an unlikely home win shortened with the bowling of De Freitas at the start of the West Indies' second innings. Haynes out for 8, followed later in the same over by Richardson. A centurion in the first innings, out for naught in the second, courtesy of another catch by Hick. And when Simmons was trapped leg before, the West Indies were 24 for 3. Suddenly, England's modest lead of 151 was looking as if it might be enough. But enter the Master Blaster. Viv Richards had threatened to play a decisive innings all summer. Now, after a shaky start, he was to do just that. With the assistance of Hooper, Richards took the game beyond England. He clinched victory with a straight 6, an appropriate way to decide a fascinating match. With 1 test remaining, the West Indies lead 2-1.
Nigel Mansell has won the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, his 3rd victory in a row. It means he's now just 8 points behind the World Championship leader, Ayrton Senna.
Right now, Nigel Mansell is simply unstoppable. After a flying start today, there was scarcely a doubt that motor racing's man of the moment would make it 3 wins in succession for the first time in his career. Some thought Hockenheim would expose the Williams car's comparative lack of speed. Mansell's driving made it seem negligible, easily holding off the chasing pack. Only a slowish tyre change interrupted his dominance of the race. Once back in front, there was only ever going to be another Mansell victory. Real battle was going on behind him, Ayrton Senna refusing to yield to arch-rival Alain Prost, again leaving the Frenchman out of the race and seething. Senna's luck, though, was to turn sour once more, running out of fuel on the last lap for the second race running, making Mansell's ultimate victory all the more valuable. He's now only 8 points behind the Brazilian.
Having won 3 in the row, the next race is just harder. I mean, you can't do better except hopefully try and win the next one. And for sure, Ferrari and McLaren will be very, very fast in Hungary.
Even so, for now, there's no doubting that no one's faster than Nigel Mansell.
And that's it. More news at 10:15.
Good evening. As the warm and sunny weather spreads to the northwest, so it'll turn more unsettled in the southwest. Today, the satellite picture shows sunshine over most of England and Wales, just 1 or 2 places like Dartmouth round to the Isles of Scilly with some more persistent cloud. But further north and west, the cloud breaking up quite nicely, so a better day there tomorrow. Fairly quiet night, perhaps some patchy cloud around some of the coasts, some mist and fog, perhaps some coming into these northeastern coasts. Fairly warm night, temperatures in places as high as 15. There's tomorrow's weather chart. This front moving away, the thundery low moving into the southwest, but it's the high pressure that still holds a great deal of influence over the country for tomorrow. Most places warm and very sunny. In the southwest, 1 or 2 showers coming in, and there could still be some persistent low cloud and mist and fog on these eastern coasts of Scotland and northeastern England. Later tomorrow, we'll see some showers getting into the Channel Islands, perhaps getting into Wales as things continue to improve in the northwest. That's it from me. Good evening to you.
This Sunday, Alan Titchmarsh follows the Scottish Pilgrims. Then at 7:15, Butterflies.
Oh, why is it when I put you in the oven you look like lemon sole, and when I take you out you look like an old banana?
At 7:45, Around the World in 80 Days, Dubai to Bombay in a dhow.
Everyone's terribly keen to make us comfortable. As protection from the heat, a tarpaulin is raised above the sacks of dates, sultanas and pistachio nuts, which make up the floor of our first-class deck accommodation.
8:35, For Those I Loved. The struggle for survival in the Warsaw Ghetto continues. And at 10:30, Everyman looks at the island people who worship the idea of America.
We were astonished to see how all together they were. Black Americans and white Americans, all working together.
A selection for Sunday on One.
I'm journeying this week in search of the roots of Celtic Christianity. Where to find them? I'll give you a clue. It's 3 miles long, 1.5 miles wide, and it's been described as a piece of tissue paper, but it's strong enough to cope with 250,000 people every year. Now, at this stage, you're probably wondering where I'm taking you. Well, let me show you on a map of Scotland. There's Glasgow. We're making our way from Tarbert up through Dalmally, out to Oban, then across on the ferry to Mull, driving across Mull and across on another tiny ferry to Iona.